These are 3 true stories of people who worked the night shift, and every single one of them wished they hadn't. I used to work nights at a distribution warehouse just outside of Coventry. It was one of those massive places, the kind where you could shout from one end and nobody at the other would hear you. The building was probably the size of 2 football pitches, maybe more, and most of it was just rows and rows of steel shelving stacked about 20 feet high, loaded with pallets of whatever was being shipped that week. I was 24 at the time. The job was simple enough. I'd come in at 10 at night, clock in, and spend the next 8 hours doing stock count, scanning barcodes, and occasionally loading pallets with the forklift. The pay was decent for what it was, and I didn't mind the quiet. During the day the place was chaos, lorries coming and going, radios blaring, forklifts beeping non-stop. But at night, it was just me and one other bloke, usually Dave, and we'll split the warehouse down the middle. He'll take the front half near the loading bay, I'll take the back. The back section was the older part of the building. Half the overhead strip lights back there had been dead for months. Management kept saying they'll get them sorted. They never did. So you'll be walking through these aisles where every other section was just dark. Not pitch black, there was always a bit of bleed from the lights that did work, but dark enough that you couldn't see all the way to the end of the row without your torch. I'd been there about 7 months, long enough that none of this bothered me anymore. You get used to the sounds a building like that makes at night. The metal shelvings contract when the temperature drops, the roof panels creak when the wind picks up, the heating system clicks on and off. You learn the rhythms. But there's one sound I know very well, and that was the sound of a pallet jack rolling across the concrete floor. If you've ever worked in the warehouse, you know exactly what I mean. It's this heavy, grinding, metallic rumble, very distinct. You couldn't mistake it for anything else. It was a Tuesday night, mid-January, freezing outside and not much warmer inside. I was about halfway through my stock count in aisle 19, which was deep in the back section, in one of the darkest stretches. I had my scanner in one hand, clipboard in the other, torch wedged under my arm. Everything was normal. Then I heard it. A pallet jack, rolling slowly across the floor. Not close, maybe 4 or 5 aisles over, but unmistakable. I stopped what I was doing and listened. It went on for about 5 seconds, then stopped. I figured Dave had come back to grab something. We did share a couple of pallet jacks, and sometimes he'll swing into my section if he needed one. I pressed the button on my radio. "Dave, are you back here?" A second later, his voice came through. "Nah mate, I'm in the break room. Been here about 20 minutes. Why?" Nothing, I said. "Thought I heard something." "Probably the heating," he said. It wasn't the heating. I know what the heating sounds like, but I didn't push it. I just went back to my count. About 45 minutes later, it happened again. Same sound. A pallet jack rolling on concrete. But this time it was closer, maybe 2 aisles over, and it lasted longer. A good 10 seconds of slow, steady rolling before it stopped. I turned off my scanner and just stood there, completely still, listening. Nothing. I took a few steps to the end of the aisle and looked down the cross section that ran between the rows. I showed my torch both ways. Empty. Just concrete floor, steel shelving, and darkness beyond where the beam reached. I radioed Dave again. "Are you sure you're not back here?" "I'm literally eating a sandwich, mate. What's going on?" "I keep hearing a pallet jack." There was a pause. "There's nobody else in tonight. It's just us." I knew that. We always checked the sign-in sheet. There was no day crew left over. No maintenance. Nobody. The building was locked from the outside and the loading bay shutters were all down. I told myself it was something mechanical, maybe a pallet jack left on a slight incline and had shifted on its own. I'd seen that happen once before. They can roll a few inches if the brake isn't fully engaged. I tried to convince myself that was it. I went back to work. The third time was about 20 minutes later, and it was right behind me. I was standing in the middle of aisle 21, facing away from the dark end, when I heard it start up directly in the aisle I was in. Behind me, close, maybe 30 feet, rolling slowly, steadily, towards me. I spun around and pointed my torch straight down the aisle. Nothing. Empty. The sound had stopped the second I turned. My heart was properly going now. I could feel it in my throat. I walked the full length of that aisle with my torch sweeping left to right. There was no pallet jack. There was nothing on the floor at all. I checked the adjacent aisles. Nothing. I didn't finish my count that night. I went to the break room and sat with Dave until our shift ended. He thought I was being dramatic. I didn't care. The next morning, before clocking in, I asked the day shift supervisor if I could look at the CCTV from the back section. He pulled it up on the monitor. The camera in that part of the warehouse were motion triggered. They would only record when they detected movement, and they'd flag it with a motion tracking box on screen. We scrubbed through the footage from my shift. At 2:47 AM, one of the cameras covering aisle 18 activated. The motion box appeared on screen, tracking something moving through the aisle. Slowly, from left to right, the box moved smoothly, the way it does when it's following a person walking. But the aisle was empty. There was nothing there. The camera had detected motion. The software was tracking something, but the image showed an empty aisle. We checked the next trigger, 3:34 AM. Same thing, a different camera, aisle 20. The motion box sliding across the screen, following nothing visible. The supervisor stared at the monitor for a long time. Then he said, "Probably a software glitch. I'll put in a ticket." He never put in a ticket. I checked. I worked there for another 3 months before I found something else. I never did another stock count in the back section alone, and I never heard the pallet jack again, but I've never got an explanation either, and that's the part that still bothers me. Not the sound of it, but the fact that the camera saw something moving through those aisles that I couldn't see, something that was there and wasn't at the same time. I worked as a night care assistant at a residential nursing home in North Yorkshire. It was an old building, used to be a country house of some kind before it was converted, so it had that feel. High ceilings, long corridors, radiators that clanked, the kind of place that's perfectly fine during the day when there's staff everywhere and the telly's on in the lounge. But at night, when it's just you and 20 sleeping residents, it has a completely different energy. I was 22, it was my first proper job after finishing college, and I specifically chosen nights because the pay was a bit better and I'm naturally a night owl anyway. My shift ran from 10 PM to 7 AM. Most nights it was just me on one wing and another carer on the other. We'll check in on each other every couple of hours, but otherwise you were on your own. The routine was simple. Hourly checks on the residents, peek through the door, make sure they're breathing, make sure they haven't fallen out of bed. In between, you'll sit at the nurse's station and wait for the call lights. Each room has a pull cord that triggered an alarm and lit up a panel at the station, showing which room needed you. Most of the time it was just someone needing a toilet or wanting a glass of water, or just confused and wanted company. You get used to it. Room 211 was at the far end of my wing, on the first floor, right in the corner of the building. It was a single room, bigger than most of the others because of how the corner was shaped. The last resident who'd been in there was a woman named Margaret. She'd been with us for about 2 years before she passed. Lovely woman, very quiet, never used her call light. She died peacefully in her sleep one night about 5 weeks before any of this started. After she passed, the room was cleared, the bed was stripped, and the door was left closed. It hadn't been reassigned yet. There was no one in it. So when the call light in 211 went off at 2:40 in the morning on a Wednesday in November, I nearly spilt my tea. I looked at the panel. Room 211, steady light, definitely active. My first thought was malfunction. These systems aren't exactly new. The wiring in a building this old can do strange things. I got up, I walked down the corridor, and I stopped outside the door. I knocked lightly, habit, and then I opened it. The room was dark, empty, the bed was stripped to the mattress, the curtains were open and a bit of moonlight was coming through. Everything was exactly as it had been since Margaret left. Except the call cord. It was pulled down. The way the system works, the cord hangs from a unit mounted on the wall near the bed. To trigger the alarm, you pull it downwards. It's a physical action. Something has to pull it. It doesn't just fall. There's resistance built into the mechanism. I pushed it back up, which reset the alarm, and I stood there for a moment. The room was cold, colder than the corridor, which didn't make sense because the radiator was on. Then I noticed the window. It was wide open, not cracked, fully open, and the window screen, the fly mesh thing that clips onto the frame, was gone. Not on the floor, not leaning against the wall. Gone. The room was on the first floor, not the ground floor, first floor, a good 12 feet off the ground outside. I closed the window, locked it, and went back to the nurse's station. I wrote it up in the log as a possible malfunction and a maintenance issue with the window. I told myself the wind had somehow pushed the window open and a draft had pulled the cord. I didn't fully believe it, but I didn't have a better explanation. 3 days later, same thing, call light, room 211. Just after 3 AM. I went in, cord pulled down, window closed this time, but the room was freezing. I'd checked every inch of it, under the bed, in the wardrobe, the ensuite bathroom. Nothing. Nobody. It happened again the following week, and again the week after that. Always between 2 and 4 AM. Always the same. The cord pulled down, the room empty, the room colder than it should have been. The other night carer, Sandra, thought I was winding her up until it happened on one of her rounds and she came back to the station white as a sheet. The last time was the one that made me hand in my notice. It was a Friday night. I was sat at the station doing paperwork when 211 lit up again. By this point I was almost used to it, as horrible as that sounds. I grabbed my torch and I walked down there, trying not to think too much about it. I opened the door. The room was dark, the cord pulled down, but this time there was something on the window still, a footprint, a muddy footprint, just one, on the interior ledge of the window, and it was facing inwards, toes pointed into the room, as if someone had climbed in from the outside, stepped onto the sill and come into the room. The window was closed and locked. I backed out of the room, closed the door, and went straight to the phone. I called the on-call manager and told her everything. She came in at 5 AM and saw the footprint herself. We called the building security company and asked them to review the exterior cameras that cover that side of the building. They found nothing. No one approaching the building, no one on the grounds at all. Just an empty car park and a dark wall with a window 12 feet up. The room was locked permanently after that. They told residents' families it was for refurbishment, but the staff all knew. I worked 2 more shifts after that night. On the second one, as I was walking past 211, I heard the muffled buzz of a cool alarm going off behind the locked door. I didn't stop. I didn't check. I walked straight past and handed in my resignation the next morning. I don't know what was in that room. I don't think it was Margaret. I don't think it was a person either. Because a person doesn't climb through a locked first floor window without showing up on a single camera. Whatever it was, it wanted someone to come to that room. And I'm glad I stopped going. For about 3 years in my mid-20s, I worked as an overnight security guard at a regional museum in the Midlands. It wasn't a massive place, nothing like the British Museum or anything, but it was a decent size. 3 floors, multiple galleries, a temporary exhibit hall, a gift shop, offices, and a maze of corridors connecting it all. During the day it had maybe 100 visitors. At night it had one. Me. My shift was midnight to 6 AM. I'd arrive, check in with the evening staff as they left, and then I had the entire building to myself. The job was straightforward. Monitor the cameras, do a walkthrough every 90 minutes, and make sure nobody broke in and nobody was still inside. That was it. The rest of the time you could read, watch something on your phone, whatever, as long as you stayed alert and did your rounds. The building was old, Victorian era, originally a municipal hall or some sort before it became a museum in the 70s. It had all the usual quirks, pipes that groaned, floors that creaked in specific spots, doors that didn't sit right in their frames. After the first couple of weeks I mapped all these sounds in my head and I could tell you exactly what was making what noise from anywhere in the building. The third step from the top on the east staircase creaks. The fire door on the second floor whistles slightly when the heating cycles on. The display case in Gallery 4 buzzes when the temperature drops below a certain point. You learn these things. You learn these things. For the first month, nothing unusual happened. I actually enjoyed the job. There's something peaceful about being alone in a building like that at night. All the exhibits lit by the dim security lighting, the quiet. I'd do my rounds and actually stop to read the plaques on things I walked past 50 times. Then small things started happening. The first thing I noticed was the cupboards. There's a staff kitchen on the ground floor near the security office. It has overhead cupboards, nothing special, standard ones with magnetic catches. A couple of times, I'd leave the security office to do a round, come back 20 minutes later, and one of the cupboard doors would be open. Just one, never the same one twice. I assumed I'd left them open and just forgot. You don't really pay attention to cupboard doors at 3 in the morning, so I ignored it. Then it was the lights. I'd switch off the light in the staff toilet before leaving. I was certain of this because I always did it. It was part of my mental routine. Lock the security office, walk past the toilet, flick the light off, head upstairs. But twice in 1 week I came back from my rounds to find the toilet light on. I started second guessing myself. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe I was on autopilot and not actually doing the things I thought I was doing. That's a real thing on night shifts. You can go through the motions without really registering them. But then something happened I couldn't explain away. There was a small room on the ground floor near the back of the building that the staff used as a combination break room and library. It had a table, a few chairs, and a bookshelf along one wall stocked with donated books, mostly history and local interest stuff. I used to eat my meal in there because it was warmer than the security office and it felt more like a normal room. One night, this was about 6 weeks in, I was sitting at the table eating a sandwich, looking at the bookshelf. A title caught my eye. I couldn't remember exactly what it was, something about local folklore. I stood up, pulled it off the shelf, and flipped through a few pages, and said out loud to no one, "That looks interesting. I'll have to remember that one." I put the book back, finished my sandwich, and pushed my chair in, turned off the light, closed the door behind me. It had a handle you had to pull shut. It didn't close on its own, and I walked back to the security office, I'd been back at the monitors for maybe 5 minutes when one of the cameras flagged a motion alert. I looked at which camera it was. It was the break room. The camera in there was motion triggered, like all of them. The feed showed the room and the little motion tracking box. This green rectangle the system overlays on whatever it detects moving was active. It was moving slowly across the frame, from the door towards the table, tracking something. But the room was empty. There was nothing there. Just the table, the chairs, the bookshelf, and a green box sliding smoothly across the screen as if someone was walking across the room. I watched it. The box moved to roughly where the table was, and then stopped. Then the feed went static for about 2 seconds and came back to the still image. No motion detected. I sat there for a long time. Then I got up and walked to the break room. The door was open. I closed it. I was certain. The light was on. I'd switched it off. I was certain about that too. I stepped inside. The chair I'd been sitting in was pushed in, exactly as I left it. But the chair next to it, the one no one had sat in, was pulled out from the table. Not all the way, but enough that it was clearly at an angle, like someone had pulled it out to sit down. And on the table, right in front of that chair, was the book, the folklore book I looked at. It was open, face down, placed there as if someone had been reading it and set it down to save that page. I hadn't moved that book. I put it back on the shelf. I remembered doing it. The room was empty. I checked. The whole floor was empty. I checked that too. Every door, every window, every cupboard, every display case. The exterior cameras showed nothing. No one had entered or exited the building. The front door was locked. The fire exits were sealed. I was alone. I went back to the security office, turned on every light I could reach from the panel, and sat in the lobby until 6 AM. I didn't do another round that night. I told the day staff in the morning. Most of them laughed. One of them, an older woman who worked there for 15 years, just looked at me and said, "Which room?" When I told her, she nodded and said, "Don't eat in there anymore." She wouldn't elaborate. Nobody would. I worked there for another 2 years after that. Things kept happening. Small things. The same kind of inexplicable arrangements and sounds. I learned to live with it the way you learn to live with a draft or a creaky step. It became part of the building's personality. But I never ate in that room again. And I never spoke out loud when I was alone in the building. Whatever was in there was listening, and it was responding. And honestly, that was enough for me to keep my mouth shut and just do my rounds. If you've ever had a scary experience working the night shift, send your story to the email in the description. And if you're listening to this on a night shift right now, maybe keep the lights on for the next hour. Subscribe if you enjoy, and I'll see you in the next video.